Why? A flag fluttering in the distance. What do you see in a flag? Just a small piece of cloth tied with a string to the end of a pole. Am I right? Wrong. A flag has massive significance. It is a nation's most concentrated piece of identity. It communicates who the citizens are as a people, what they value, and how they see themselves. Flags are powerful because they take a nation's entire story, its struggles and its hopes, and compress them into a single image. Often, a flag is a symbol of a nation's history, its ideals, its struggles, victories, geography, religion, culture, and aspirations. Now, how do nations choose their flags? Most nations adopt symbols that have represented them for centuries. For example, the crescent in Islamic nations. Some flags are designed to represent unity. For example, Ireland's tricolor, or tricolor as they say in the US. The flag of three colors, green, white, and orange, was introduced in 1848. Green represented the Catholic community and orange represented the Protestants. White symbolized the peace between them. It was adopted officially in 1922 and confirmed constitutionally in 1937. The flag of India looks similar to it, as it uses three distinct colors with white in the center to symbolize peace. But the similarity ends there. Everything else about it is different. And thus, every nation's flag tells us the story of that nation. As we near the end of the Atonement series, we are examining an interesting feature about flags. About crosses on flags. Now, here is a question for you to ponder over. Why did 28 UN member countries choose crosses on their flags? There has to be a story there. It carries a cluster of theological ideas rooted in Christianity. The cross has a purpose. It signifies redemption, victory, protection, and hope. When nations adopted the cross, they were often saying, Our story is inseparable from the story of Christ. Let me give you an example. Consider Georgia's flag. It is one of the most explicitly theological national flags in the world. As you can see, there are 5 crosses. These 5 crosses are sometimes interpreted as representing the 5 wounds of Christ. Another interpretation is the large cross is that of Saint George, the patron saint of the nation. The 4 smaller crosses represent the spread of the gospel to the 4 corners of the earth. Clearly, all this is not just history, it is theology woven into national identity. Most national flags that feature a cross do so because the cross was historically a symbol of Christianity. Let me give you a few examples. To begin with, let's look at the Nordic flags. The Nordic countries are Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Iceland. Now, the flags of all these nations use the Scandinavian cross. Now, how did this happen? The oldest is the Danish flag, dating back to 1219, which is credited to influencing the other 4 Nordic countries. Now, all 5 countries chose the cross in order to represent Christian identity. Look at the UK's Union Jack. It combines 3 crosses. St. George's Red Cross, which represents England. Then St. Andrew's White Cross, which is actually a white diagonal saltire. It represents Scotland. And then there is St. Patrick's Red Cross, again a red diagonal saltire, which represents Ireland. Each cross again was shaped by the influence of Christianity. Then consider the flag of Switzerland. It features a white cross on a red background. This was officially adopted as the national flag in 1889. Although its origins go back several centuries. Now, why did Switzerland choose the cross? Once again, it is connected to its Christian heritage. And then we have the flag of Greece. The flag of Greece features 9 horizontal stripes of alternating blue and white, with a blue canton bearing a white cross. Why did Greece choose the cross? Again, it represents the Greek Orthodox faith, central to Greek national identity. And then we have the flag of Tonga, a red cross and a white canton. Why did Tonga choose the cross? It symbolizes the nation's Christian faith, adopted after conversion in the 19th century. Let's look at a few more. The Dominican Republic. It's a white cross dividing blue and red quarters. Now, why did the Dominican Republic choose the cross? Because it represents Christianity and the nation's founding ideals of faith and liberty. And then Dominica, another country in the Caribbean. The flag contains a 3-colored cross with a parrot emblem. Now, again, why did Dominica choose the cross? Because it symbolizes the island's Christian heritage and the unity of its 3 main ethnic groups. Burundi, a white diagonal cross saltire. Again, Burundi chose the cross as part of the Christian cross family, and it symbolizes peace and unity. And what about Slovakia? On its flag, we find a double cross on mountains in coat of arms. And again, Slovakia chose the cross because it represents Christianity. And finally, let's look at one more. Portugal. The flag of Portugal is an historic compound cross in the coat of arms. Now, again, why did Portugal choose the cross? Because it derived from the early Christian identity of the kingdom. Can you see? So many nations chose to use the cross. Why? Because Christianity shaped national identity for over 1,000 years. And just as in the Old Testament, covenant identity was marked by visible signs, like circumcision, the keeping of the Sabbath, and sacrifices, in Christian nations, the cross became the visible covenant sign of a people who saw themselves as belonging to Christ. The cross on a national flag is never just decoration. It is a public confession of how a people understood God, history, and themselves. Now, does the Bible talk about flags? Obviously, you would say no, but it does. Scripture does speak of the Lord's banner. Albeit metaphorical, such banners declare allegiance to Him and not to a religion or an ideology. Let me give you 2 verses. First of all, Song of Solomon chapter 2 verse 4, where the bride says, "His banner over me is love." And then in Psalm 60 verse 4, we read, "You have given a banner to those who fear you." When nations adopted the cross on their flag, they were saying, God acted in history by coming into the world to die on a cross. But His death was not defeat, but victory. Christ's victory had shaped the destiny of these nations, and so the cross on the flag of those medieval nations meant we pledge allegiance to Christ. Our national story is part of God's larger story. They were saying our laws and identity are shaped by the gospel. The cross was thus a theological declaration of trust in God's protection and rule. But perhaps, more than all, the cross was a symbol of our reconciliation to God, which is the essence of the gospel. If you consider the cross, you can see that it is made of 2 pieces of wood, one the vertical and the other horizontal. The vertical represents man's peace with God, while the horizontal represents peace amongst humans, man's peace with man. So many nations, even non-Christian nations, use the cross to represent unity. For example, the unity of tribes in Dominica, the unity of kingdoms in the United Kingdom, the unity of ethnic groups in Burundi, and the unity of Christian heritage in the Nordic countries. Together, the vertical and the horizontal of the cross indicate the 2 commandments of love. Love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And so, what does the cross visually communicate to us? That we are all one people, joined together to God. Now that said, I need to share with you the sad truth, the sad reality, the sad history of the cross. No, I'm not talking about martyrdom. I have already spoken about martyrdom, but I want to speak about something else for the rest of this episode. The cross is one of the few symbols in human history that carries both deep religious meaning and powerful political meaning. But these two meanings are not the same, even when they appear identical on a flag, shield, or emblem. The difference lies in what the cross is pointing to. And so, it is very important that we ask ourselves, is it pointing to Christ or is it pointing to the nation? This tells you that there is a great difference between a political cross and a religious cross. Religious crosses point to God's kingdom, whereas political crosses point to earthly kingdoms. We find crosses on churches, Christian art, Bibles, clothes, jewelry, and so on. Now, what is the purpose of all these crosses? To point the citizens of that nation to Christ, to salvation, to faith and worship. But political crosses are different. They do not point to Christ or the gospel. Instead, they signify national identity, cultural heritage, history, military unity, and so on. But here lies the controversy. Because even such crosses may have Christian roots, but the message has changed, and that is why it leads to confusion. One shape, but two different meanings. In fact, two opposite meanings. A cross on an altar or a church points you to Christ's sacrifice. It calls people to humility, repentance, love, forgiveness, and sacrifice. But what does a political cross call people to? To loyalty, courage, and national pride. These are very different. But what happens when meanings collide? History shows what happens when religious and political meanings merge. The results can be dangerous and even explosive. What does a cross on a shield signify? What happens when soldiers bear the emblem of a cross? What a different message it is when a Christian makes the sign of the cross and a crusader marches under the sign of a cross. This table makes it very clear. When you compare a religious cross with a political cross, a religious cross points to God, whereas a political cross points to a nation. The meaning of the religious cross is the sacrifice of Christ, our salvation, worship, or basically the gospel. But a political cross means our national identity, our heritage. This religious cross is used by the church, by Christian believers, whereas the political cross is used by the state, by the army. What is the message of a religious cross? Jesus is Lord. But the message of the political cross is this nation is Christian rooted. Now, what happens when these two merge? That is the sad history I want to talk about. Now think of the flag of Mozambique. It's a unique flag. It has an AK-47 on it, and it is the only flag in the world to display a modern weapon. This is the antithesis of the Christian flag, which has a cross on it. Why did these nations choose the cross? They didn't display a gun or an axe or a dagger. Instead, they chose a cross because it was a symbol of sacrifice and martyrdom, the symbol of unity and love. How ironic then that this cross, the very emblem of peace, later became the symbol of the military too. So can you see what happens when the religious cross and the political cross are combined into one? When the state and the church are joined as one? It all began in 312 AD with Emperor Constantine claiming that he saw a sign of the cross in a vision with the message, "In this sign, conquer." Later, as medieval Europe from the 5th to the 11th century became Christian, armies adopted crosses to mark themselves as defenders of the faith. The very symbol of suffering and sacrifice was then taken to the battlefield and used by armies who were slaughtering people in the name of Christ. Can you see what was happening? These deluded soldiers believed they were fighting under Christ's authority, with Christ's protection, and for Christ's cause. They believed they were on a holy mission, fighting a holy war over evil. And isn't that what today is called a jihad? Yes, even Christians did that very same thing. Jesus warned that in the last days, people would kill you and think they are doing God a service. Further down in history came the Crusades from 1095 to 1291, where again the cross was used as a symbol for holy war. Different crusader groups used different colored crosses. The red cross was used by English crusaders, the white cross by French crusaders, and the black cross by German crusaders. And what is common to all of them? They were totally deceived in thinking that by fighting under the sign of the cross, they were soldiers of the cross. And then further down in history, from the 12th to the 15th centuries, military orders like the Templars, the Hospitallers, and the Teutonic Knights used crosses as their insignia. And then from the 16th to the 19th centuries, as kingdoms became nations, the cross was used as a symbol of national warfare. Can you see how that most beautiful symbol of peace and love became a hated symbol, and it ended up shaping 1,700 years of military history? This is what happens where the gospel is not preached properly. The kingdom of God and the kingdoms of men merge. Soldiers of the cross who should be preaching against sin and living righteously, lovingly, and peacefully become crusaders of the state for their identity and their heritage. And that is how Christian nationalism is born. I have seen Christian believers filled with anger and violence, holding wooden clubs in their hands, ready to attack others in the name of Christ. They were doing it zealous for Jesus. One Christian brother, he told me, "I am ready to shed blood, because the Bible tells us, "Ye have not shed blood, striving against sin." What does that verse mean? It means that in striving against sin, we must be ready to shed our blood. But here was this man, a Christian believer of so many years, ready to shed another person's blood, filled with such zeal for Christ. Is this Christianity? I've seen people beat one another in their zeal for Christ. How wrong can people go when the gospel is not preached correctly? Dear Christian, the cross has become the most compelling symbol on nations' flags. This is not because the cross itself is honorable. No, on the contrary, crucifixion on a cross is the most shameful method of killing. So what has made it such an iconic symbol? It was because of one man who loved his enemies so much that he allowed himself to be put to death on a cross. And that is the cross we must embrace. Let us not be like these religious zealots, Christian nationalists, who march around with a flag ready to slaughter, thinking they are zealous for Christ. Let me conclude telling you my love for the cross. I was born to Christian parents. For most of my life, the cross was merely a religious symbol for me. I didn't have any personal attachment to the cross because I never understood the gospel. But ever since God opened my eyes, and I began to understand the purpose of the cross and all these beautiful studies on the atonement, I realized how much I owe my life to the one who died for me. Friends, I am alive today because of the cross. The cross became my gateway to the Father, the doorway into the Trinitarian circle. Who am I? I am a wretched, depraved, foul sinner who has totally lost hope in myself. My hope is in the cross of Christ alone. And that is why every day from when I receive the gospel, I wake up in the morning and the first thing I do is to thank my God for the cross. I do this not as a matter of rule, but simply because that's what my heart wants to do. I worship God every morning, not out of duty, not as a ritual, not because I have to, but because I love to, I want to. I thank Him for the cross. Recently, I visited Switzerland. And while I was there one morning, as I looked out of my window during my little time of devotion, I saw something in the distance. And I realized it was a fond reminder of my passion. A little token reminding me to raise my grateful praises to my Redeemer. Oh, my dear friend, probably you have a story about the cross too. I'd love to know about it. And I know that in the end, when all my words fall silent and every argument has run its course, I stand before the cross with nothing left to prove and everything left to receive. And it is here, in this place where heaven bent low and love stretched wide, that I discovered who I truly am. I am not the sum of my failures, nor the weight of my striving. I am the one whom Christ loved, and for whom Christ gave himself. The cross does not ask us to admire it from a distance. It calls us nearer, into the mystery where love meets wrath, judgment becomes mercy, sorrow becomes healing, and death becomes the doorway to life. Dear friend, we have just one episode left. And in that final episode, I shall conclude this grand series on the atonement with some final thoughts. God bless you.